this is a single sign-on with SimpleSAMLphp. It's a save our ship kind of an operation here. So I know it can be a struggle sometimes to implement this. I recently tried for my third time and succeeded. So yeah, I guess it's that third time's the charm. I'm Dan Gurin. I'm with Civic Actions. I'm an engineer and wear some other hats. You can find me on Twitter at dgurin, and just about everywhere else I'm Dangur. Some people say danger, but yeah, Dangur is my Drupal.org name, and GitHub and LinkedIn and all that stuff. So yeah, if you want to get in touch after this and or have any suggestions or changes for the talk, I might give this again at another camp or something like that. So the reason why we want to use single sign-on is typically these days we're doing Drupal sites in a larger enterprise kind of an environment, and so they already have all their users and in another system, and it wouldn't really make sense to make all those user accounts again in Drupal. Set them up, and then when people move on or get abducted by aliens, then you have to turn off their account manually in all these different places, and then on what date does that happen? So it really gets to be a pretty big administrative burden to to manage user accounts on a lot of different systems. So being able to do that on one central system is a nice thing. There's also support with what's my password. Probably most of us have password managers now, but not everybody's there yet. And then also a security kind of a consideration also. If if your users have to have a bunch of different accounts and maybe they have different password policies on the different accounts, so then they're coming up with weaker passwords, they're writing it down on paper, silly things like that. So you can just have one password, or with a policy, or have if you have multi-factor authentication, just have it in that one place. You don't have to implement it over and over again. Not fun things to do. So here we see, as an example, you can have this single account that would, you'd be able to use on all your different services. Maybe for folks like us, we use Jira and Slack and Gmail, but really you can connect it to all of these different services and custom apps and things like that, and of course Drupal, which is not on this nice graphic that I was able to find on the internet. So, but Drupal could be one of these services, and so the centralized user graphic in the middle there would be the identity provider, and then all of these other services that are using that are service providers. So that's kind of how that works there. Yeah, so we have able to use the same password like we talked about, same username, and we don't have to make changes to these passwords. I know that sometimes organizations will think that they're making their system more secure by requiring password changes like every 90 days or something, and I just want to let everyone know that actually makes systems less secure because of that problem with people coming up with less secure passwords and doing silly things with passwords. So, it's now accepted as a best practice where, if there hasn't been a compromising of someone's password, don't force them to change it just because a certain amount of time has elapsed. Certainly if there's been a breach, that would be a good time to change passwords. Or if that password has been compromised in some other way, certainly a good time to do that. These different applications are able to use a centralized user management, and in that there's the authentication piece. So that's just is someone logged in or not, kind of a yes or no Boolean kind of a thing. But then there's also authorization, which is saying in a Drupal kind of way, like what is their role? What kind of access do they have? What kind of permissions is this user going to have? And you can use the centralized identity to be able to define some of that too. So it would be possible to know, say that a user was coming in and is on the management team and therefore should have the management role that you made on your Drupal site. If that's how it's going to work, it's possible that you would manually assign roles, but it is possible to assign the roles, and even groups also, if you have that kind of a setup going on. All right, so these are the different providers that I talked about a little bit before with that nice graphic, and here's the text version of it. If you're more of a reader than like to look at pretty pictures type of person. So the identity provider, I just thought it was kind of weird that they put the ID in lowercase there, but that's how they do it. So who am I to argue with that? So this would commonly be an LDAP, which is a Microsoft service. So if it's like an Active Directory, it would be in that kind of a system, or you might have a centralized authentication service, which could also connect with that in the back. It's pretty typical, I think, to at least in my experience, that there's like a Microsoft LDAP that holds all the users, right? So I think this is what I've seen most frequently. It is possible to have Drupal be the identity provider, if that's the way that you want to go. If you want to manage all the users in maybe just have a Drupal site that does that. It is possible to do it, but I haven't really seen that done a lot because it's maybe not the best tool for that job. If I might be able to be slightly critical of Drupal here. Okay. So the service provider side, that's where Drupal is typically going to be, so the authentication can happen through SAML, and I think I'm going to say this right, Shibboleth. I think historically you would get killed if you said that the wrong way, is the story, but we won't necessarily get into all that. So right, we talked about the authentication and authorization pieces where are you logged in, and then what are your roles going to be? So, and this is all open source. In the SimpleSAMLphp, both the SAML and the Shibboleth. So we like to see that. So for a service provider, you want to basically find your external authentication system. So you want to identify what that is. So let's say we're setting up a Drupal site that's going to use SimpleSAML here. Yeah, you have to know what the identity provider is going to be. And basically the use case here is where you want to use Drupal to do something else, right? We want to maybe have it rule the world or something. So, or manage a sports team, we'll say. So basically there's two parts to the installation. There's the SimpleSAMLphp library itself, and then there's also an auth Drupal module, SimpleSAMLphp auth Drupal module that really helps out quite a bit with all this stuff and works pretty nicely. So yeah, just to get started with like your kind of prerequisites, this is a kind of a slick way to make sure that your PHP has all of the extensions that you need. So you can just kind of run this this command, the php-m will show you all of your extensions, and then if you just grep for, which is basically like a search and find for all of these different extensions, these are the ones that you have to have just to do the plain vanilla SimpleSAMLphp installation. If you want to add some things, you might need some extra things, but extra extensions to do some other things with this. This is just kind of the base requirements. And then you can download it, just click style on the download page, or if you're feeling like installing it from the repo, there's instructions to do that, and I'll post these slides now that they are finalized on the camp page for this session. And yeah, so if you do the download, you can just get the tarball. It's like .tar.gz, and unzip it, untar it, and you typically want to do that in the repo root, not in the web root. That's kind of the best practice if you are versioning your code, which I'm assuming everyone is here. Okay. And yeah, the other way is to clone it. I guess, might be a little bit more complicated if you have, kind of multiple Git repos within one, but if that's what you're into, I'm certainly not going to stop you from doing that. All right. So Drupal is, kind of the application that we want to use in this case, and you'll have other applications that you're probably using also, like we said, email or whatever other apps are connected to this identity provider. So kind of the next step, once we have things installed, there are templates in the SimpleSAMLphp project for config and metadata. And you can just copy those templates, and they're pretty close to, probably what you're going to need. You can just make these directories for config here, and copy the template file into the config file itself. And also the auth sources is another file that'll go in the config. And then similar kind of thing with the metadata, and we'll get more into the details of what go in these files. But really, these 3 files are going to be mainly what you're configuring on the on the file side of things. There's a little bit of config on the Drupal side also, but you would be good probably with these 3 files. And we'll show a couple other things that you can do also, but I think this would be the bare minimum that you would need to have. So it works with sessions, and there's a data store for that, and there are 4 existing options that you can use for that, or you can write your own if you really wanted to get crazy. So the PHP one is the default. It's and it's the simplest one, which are things that it has going for it. It usually does not work in load balanced environments, which is kind of a frowny face. So I would say that probably the second choice as far as like simplicity would be the SQL option, and so it basically uses it creates a database and then uses that to store the session information. The tables are created automatically, so if you have multiple installations, you probably want to prefix that with something unique, so you don't have collisions happening. And there are options for memcache also, which is good if you want to have load balance and failover. So it's a little more sophisticated there. And then also Redis is an option if that's the technology that you prefer. And then again, you can write your own plugin, which is pretty out of scope for this talk today. Maybe that'll be my talk next year. I don't know. So when I did this, I decided to go with the SQL Session Store. And so just a few changes that I had to make is just define the store type to SQL, because like we said, it defaults to PHP. And then so this is all done in the config file, which has is basically just an array, a config array, and this is all this store stuff from the template is way at the bottom of the file. It's at the very end under the data store configuration, and then you have so that DSN that we have there is the data store name, and that's basically just defining your host and database name, which doesn't necessarily have to be that fancy, and then just some credentials that it needs to be able to make those connections. So there are a couple places where you want to make symbolic links is like probably the easiest way to go about doing it. This should really be done in like a continuous integration type of script. So like, when you go to like build your local or deploy to some sort of server environment, that these links will be created as part of that. So the first one is really important, because that is actually the the path on your website that is going to link back to the path that is in the SimpleSAML library. So You can really pick whatever path you want, but typically people use /SimpleSAML, and that'll just link to your repo root. SimpleSAML/www is where all the basically like the web app part of the SimpleSAMLphp library lives there. So so this, when you go to /SimpleSAML on your Drupal site, it's not really Drupal. It'll be going to this this SimpleSAML app, and you can use that to do some setup and configuration. Once we get things going, and then you can also use symbolic links to do this. To point folders, the folders that we created. If you remember a couple slides ago, we created the config and the metadata folders. So you definitely are going to need to make those connections. And you're probably using Composer to manage your project. So, making these symbolic links to point from the SimpleSAML library to where Composer installs it, which is probably in vendor, SimpleSAML. You'll definitely want that config and metadata. You might want to do some other folders as well, like the cert, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is like the secure certificate, and then also the logs if you choose to use the file method for logging. You can make a little log directory there and link it up. Okay, so as advertised, here are the certs. So this makes it so that your service provider Drupal site can sign requests and also receive encrypted responses from the identity provider. At present, there's only one authentication source that can be used, and that's the auth X509, and that's to validate against the LDAP user certificate attribute. So I think there are other authentication sources in the works for the future. There may be, but this is pretty much the only one for now. So yeah, so we talked about the certificate directory, and there it is at the root of your repo. You can use this this nifty command here to create your cert, and basically just pop those files that come out of that command into the cert folder. So those files will be the saml.cert and the saml.pem. You can just put both of those files in the cert directory, and this should be good to at least start testing. You also want to add those files, those file names to your auth sources file that we had talked about towards the beginning of the presentation, and that file is in the config directory as well. All right, so we want to keep things secure, of course. So SSL is required to do things properly and keep the encryption in place there. If you don't already know, you can get free SSL certificates at let'sencrypt.org. And yeah, so there's no excuse now to not be using HTTPS. Something that we also had to do just to get HTTPS to like always go to HTTPS was set this base path URL in our in config. And yeah, so that's just basically points to the place where you put SimpleSAML, and so it's probably at whatever your URL is /SimpleSAML if you have been doing things in the customary way. All right, so this image here is close to what you would see when you go to that /SimpleSAML path and you have the library installed. It will start over on the Welcome tab. But here, what we're trying to do is to get the metadata from our identity provider. And so being task-oriented here, that's basically like, you'll just have to identify and acquire this file from the identity provider. It's probably like someone in the IT department or something. If you're an agency working with an organization, so you're gonna have to figure out who that person is. And you're gonna have to email them or have a project manager or someone is gonna have to talk to that person probably. And it's really great idea to just have that person's contact information. This can really slow it down, right? If they don't respond, and there's gonna be some back and forth to try to get both of the services on the same page. So you'll basically ask this person for their metadata XML file, and hopefully they'll give you it and it'll be correct. And when you get it, you can come over here to just go to /SimpleSAML on your site, and then click on the Federation tab, that fourth Federation tab that is circled in large red oval shape there, and then you can click that link under Tools that says Parse to XML to SimpleSAMLphp metadata converter. So there's a nice tool there that'll do the parsing for you. So you just basically upload the file that you got from the identity provider, and it will output your metadata file that you can use on your end here. And so you can drop that into your metadata directory that we created before. And there are a few different options you'll see in the template, but it's probably this SAML 2.0, which is like version 2.0. IDP remote.php is most likely going to be the one, the name of the file that you're going to want to use to get this rolling here. Okay, and so you can set a default identity provider. So if you don't do this, it would just be like an extra click or two every time someone's trying to log in, which if you only have one identity provider, it's just like doesn't even make sense, right? So it's nice to set the default here where it'll just know which identity provider you want to use, and this is set in the auth sources file, which also has a config array, and you basically just set the entity ID to the URL of your IDP, the default IDP that you want to use. Okay, so you maybe have it set up now and you're testing things and you're wondering why maybe it's not working. So you want to set your logging. I like to set it way down to debug, you know, when you're just getting started, so you can see everything. That's all the messages that are coming out, you know, including the info, notice, warning, and errors. Yeah, and there are a few different handlers that that you can use for logging. So you can use the syslog, file, or the error log. And all this can be set in the config file in the config array. A lot of configs in this. And when I tried it, I wasn't really sure what was going on with the syslog. I wasn't really finding the logs in there, so I just switched it over to file, because that's something I can really hold on to, you know. So yeah, I basically just set that logging handler to file, and then when you do that, you also have to define the name of the log file, which you can name anything, but yeah. Okay, so the identity provider, this is another point where you're going to have to, you know, collaborate with the people on the other side there. They're going to set the attributes, and the attributes that that the Drupal module is going to be looking for are pretty much these three here: the unique identifier, the user, and the email. So for each user account, there are going to be at least these three pieces of information. Mail can be used as a unique identifier, since presumably no one has the same email address as anyone else. A possible problem with that is like name changes and email changes and aliases, and so if the organization that you're working with has you know, maybe a different way of uniquely identifying persons, then that would probably be preferable to the email, but you can always use the email. And there are ways on the identity provider side that they can deal with like email changes, but it's unclear to me at this point if Drupal would be able to like follow and track those changes. So I guess that's, you know, something that I think I still need to test. But if you know, people have insight into that, the identity provider I was working with assured me that there's nothing to worry about. So I guess we'll find out. Typically, this unique ID in an LDAP, like the default, is the user principal name, and then the user attribute. So that would be ideally like a short name. So it would be maybe your email address without the at domain part of it. So maybe like your first initial last name or something like that. And then, you know, email's pretty straightforward. And I think I said before, you can just use email for everything, right? If you only have one thing, get email, because it's possible to run it like that. You know, it can be the unique ID, it can be the username, and it can be the email. So, you know, maybe when you're starting, just ask for email, and you know, test on that first. So here is a picture of the SimpleSAML Drupal module, SimpleSAML auth Drupal module, and it's in the back end there. This is the third tab, so user info and syncing. And here we see an example where we are using the email address for all of these attributes. But just wanted to point out here, because I kind of assumed that I could just put email address in these fields at first, and you can't. You have to put you know, the full URL in there to make that work. So it was kind of fun hunting that down. You don't have to now. All right, so on your local dev, it's like probably not going to work on your local dev, right? Because you're probably not like on the internet, according to you know, the rest of the world as far as like being a server. And there is, you know, there are like these two-way kind of communications going on with SimpleSAML authentication. So yeah, probably you just want to like turn it off on your local, right? So you can do this probably through config split, is a good way to do it. If you screwed it up or like something and you're locked out and your site is just fatal erroring because it just kind of doesn't work on your local, you can use Drush or Drupal console to just like probably just uninstall the module. Is the easiest way to do it on your local. Ideally, you would use config split to deactivate the module here, and this is you know, from the settings there, that little checkbox, and yeah, you can you know, obviously do this in the configuration management. Also, there's an activate attribute that you can set to true or false, which corresponds to this checkbox being checked or not. And like it says here, you know, could lock you out of Drupal if you have that checked before it's time. So yeah, if you get locked out, you just turn off the module and do whatever else you need to do. But when you are ready to activate, just a handful of things you want to do. So if you have like test entities that you've been using in the metadata files, probably want to just make sure those are not in there anymore. So, you know, people can't use silly test users to actually log into your production site. If your certificate has been exposed, or maybe you are using the default certificate from SimpleSAMLphp, it is recommended that you install a new certificate. Probably on production, you want to bump that logging level, you know, up. You probably don't want to be getting every debugging notice. So maybe set that up to notice is a recommended level. And then, of course, the in the Drupal configuration management, there's that activate setting that we want to set to true, which will check this box and make it so that it's actually on. Okay, so I think the timing actually worked out here. Okay. So these are some resources. You know, there's good documentation on this overall. So you can click on those links. I'll post the slides. I'll try to get them posted like in short order after we're done here. And yeah, helpful things around in the usual places. But yeah, the SimpleSAML project itself, being open source, has pretty good documentation. I guess maybe just make sure you're on the stable version of that, of course. And if you really want to nerd out on it, there's a mailing list. If you want to get involved with like the project and stuff like that. So I think that just about does it here. So if there are any questions or anything like that, I might know the answer, but yeah.
So I think I caught you saying that you don't recommend Drupal being used as an identity provider at all. It's not the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you said.
I did say that at the beginning. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Is there a service that you do recommend as an identity provider?
Right. So the question is, since Drupal was not recommended as an identity provider, to asking like which service is recommended. I think Drupal could be used actually as an identity provider, and obviously like the open sourceness is nice. I guess more of what I was saying in the beginning is that what I commonly see is the Active Directory is like where people already have their stuff. But it could also be done like if your organization is using maybe like Google G Suite, you could use that as the identity provider. It's really if it's in an existing place and there aren't problems with it, you don't necessarily want to change horses. So I would probably look at like just using like and maybe it's in a couple places. Maybe just identify like of what you have, what's the best fit for this kind of technology, and then also, just like what has the most authoritative data in it, maybe. So you wouldn't have to necessarily do that migration. But yeah, I guess, in thinking about it, really, you could build out a very nice kind of a custom identity provider in Drupal with whatever fields you wanted to have. So in that regard, it might be the best fit. It's just that it's typically not really used for that. You'll typically just have like username, password, maybe some other fields. Maybe they're like referencing other entities. So yeah, it's
the other thing I would add to that is that it's often you want your identity provider tied either to your CRM if it's a large membership base, or to a directory tool that's already used in the organization. That's not Drupal's role, and if you make it your identity provider, you are now married to that Drupal site in a much more integral way in terms of access to other, because now it's providing identity to other parts of your network, or there's no point. And so now when you go to redesign your website, you have to worry about whether or not the new one's providing identity appropriately, or how do I migrate my identity provider at the same time I'm migrating my website, and you just made that next project 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more complex for very little gain. Okay. But throw OpenLDAP in there, and you may be happy all the way across.
If you're looking for a different service that is a identity provider for single sign-on, Okta is one, or Okta. It's OKTA,
Mm-hmm.
And it is a web-based, SaaS open source identity, or not open source, but is a identity provider that you can use that will link to Drupal, Google Suite, Salesforce, benefits platforms. That's actually what Pantheon's using right
Okay.
now, and so like that's a good one.
Okay, yeah, that was a good suggestion. So I just wanted to repeat it into the microphone and maybe get the closed captioning to get it. It's
Yeah, the closed captioning got it.
Oh, it did. Okay, it's OK TA. Okay.
What are you using for the closed captioning, by the way?
Oh, it's just Google Slides, and you can like check this checkbox, say closed caption
Google
me.
Slides is doing it that fast and that well. Wow.
Yeah, I like to think it's my microphone, but no.
I didn't realize that it added that.
Yeah, I think it's new. I saw it, so I teased it on the session description. I don't know.
That's awesome.
So it's ultra accessible here.
Thank you for using it.
Yeah, yeah.
Another quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So with the session handling going into other systems, it bypasses Drupal completely for sessions then, right?
There are different ways to handle that. So you can set it up. I mean, so let me make sure I'm getting the question first. So it's the question is, are we bypassing Drupal for sessions? And I think that the answer is no. I think there's also a Drupal session happening. I will mention, kind of as a corollary to that you can set it to provision new users when they log in for the first time to make a new Drupal user if it doesn't already exist. If it does already exist, it'll just connect you based on that unique identifier. It's a nice thing probably to provision the new users automatically, and you can even have them, like we mentioned before, is assign those roles automatically. We still have to do a little work to have the group assigned automatically. I don't know, we might have to write a little custom thing. I'm not sure if there's already anything out there that does that, but we want to at least get groups assigned based on information that is in the identity provider. All right. Well, I think we are exactly on time here. So thanks for coming out. Again, I'm Dan Gurin with Civic Actions. We do digital, open, agile services, mostly for government these days. A little bit of nonprofit stuff also. And I guess I'll see you around.